and good evening. Welcome to Viewpoint, live from Studio 7. I'm Raymond Goh. Now, for the past two episodes, we touched on the landscape of the 14th general election, as well as the hot seats in GE14, and some of the election issues that have made headlines. Today, we'll be looking at Malaysia's economic performance. And to discuss more about this, joining me today are two special guests, Ng Yin Sin, Chief Executive Officer of Centre for Research, Advisory and Technology, or CREATE, and also Desmond Anil, Managing Director of Hernan Crest Group. Welcome to the studio to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Now, before we get into our discussion, let's have a look at this.
Kemungkinan besar kita akan menghadapi krisis ekonomi tahun depan.
Ada ahli ekonomi lain mengatakan bankrupt lebih awal. 我哋一步一步衝緊落去一個破產嘅國家。
In ASEAN, Singapore and Malaysia category. The other ASEAN countries have D category. Jadi kalau nak kata kita ni negara bankrupt, logically lah kalau ikut hukum akal, category B countries will be bankrupt first. Bukan A.
The World Bank expects Malaysia's economy to grow by 4.3% this year and is expected to further expand by 4.5% in 2018.
The World Economic Forum now ranks Malaysia as the most competitive developing economy in Asia.
Malaysia has done remarkably well. We're forgetting the past performance over the last 5 years has been truly impressive.
Malaysia is very business friendly. It's very efficient. It's much more efficient than I thought.
So, that's what we have for you on Viewpoint this evening. The opposition claims that Malaysia is on the brink of bankruptcy, while the government says our economy is doing pretty well. We're about to hear the assessment from our guests, but first of all, here's the big question. Is Malaysia going bankrupt? Yisin?
Nope.
Desmond?
Not at all.
All right, now we have a program and we can discuss. Let's take a dive in at the GDP growth of Malaysia for a start, okay? We're looking at the state of the economy leading up to the elections. GDP growing by 5.9% in 2017, forecast by Bank Negara to grow at 5.7% for this year. Are these respectable numbers?
Well, I feel that the 5.7 growth for 2018 is actually mainly driven by very resilient domestic demand and exports of manufactured goods. That's one thing that we should recognize that. And of course, many among us may not realize that our GDP growth during Prime Minister Najib's time, during his tenure of 8 years being the Prime Minister, is actually double of what Tun Mahathir is 22 years stint as a leader. And during Tun Mahathir's time, our debt to GDP ratio actually rose to above 100% in the first 6 years of his tenure as the Prime Minister, of course to subsidize a lot of the privatization activities and a lot of big corporations back then. But today our ratio is at a mere 50.9%. So if we didn't go bankrupt back then when the debt to GDP to debt ratio was above 100%, how are we supposed to go bankrupt today when the ratio was 50.9%? That's the first question that I would like to ask. But of course, nominal GDP standing stood at 705.4 billion when Najib took office in 2009 and was on track to hit the 1.3 trillion ringgit in terms of economy, which of course 605 billion more than the beginning of his tenure as a PM. So the total GDP in 2003 when Tun M resigned as a PM was 371.7 billion. So in 8 years, the nominal growth of our economy is also about double the size of what Tun M have actually achieved during his 22 years.
Now, as we are talking about GDP, Desmond, perhaps you can share with us, analysts and economists have always viewed GDP as being translated into economic progress and prosperity. Why is it that somehow not every layer of society feels this impact?
Well, Raymond, you got to look at it. The gross domestic product, or the GDP itself, is affected by many aspects of it. One of it is actually on the exports, right? Now look at what Ian have just mentioned. She has just given you the results of exports itself, right? And looking at the increase in growth in exports in our country itself, you can have a look at it. You know, Malaysia is actually moving into a different direction here. Okay, we started off. Look at World Bank's report. Okay, we started off with just being an agriculture nation,
Right.
right? And now suddenly we've become more robust. We became more manufacturing in nature. You know, we went through digital transformation. Now slowly we are moving into that kind of aspects. So naturally the GDP itself will take its turn. You know, looking at the culture of what we are today, you know, we were no more the nation that we was before. And today we are actually looking at, you know, how, established we are, you know, as a nation itself, how economically okay we are right now, because let's just bring it down to layman's terms, you know, all these numbers sometimes makes life more difficult, right? You think? Yeah, so
That's quite true.
yeah, look at a layman today, you know, are we having poverty levels to that extent?
Well, the B40, which we'll touch on in a little while.
Yeah.
But under the caretaker Prime Minister Najib Tun Razak, we've actually seen the fastest pace of economic growth in the past several years. Now, coming back to the issue of debt to ratio of 684 billion debt versus 1.35 trillion, which is about 50%. That's our debt to GDP ratio.
Where do you get these figures, Raymond? Tell me, where do you get these figures? Trillion?
Google.
Yeah, Google, is it?
Yeah, these are official figures. Yeah. But what I'd like to ask you for your insight is 50% debt to GDP ratio. And by the way, the past couple of years, it's been increasing. The debt has been increasing by about an average of 10%, meaning, of course, that by the year, say, 2020, 21, 22, we will probably hit a debt of 1 trillion. How do you see this? Should we be concerned about this?
Let me put this into very basic layman terms that non-economists can understand. So assuming that your income per year is a mere 10,000 ringgit and your car loan is 13,000 ringgit. There's another person with an annual income of 100,000 ringgit with a car loan of 65,000 ringgit. If you look at it in the nominal term, 13,000 versus 65,000, of course the 65,000 sounds really scary. However, who is in more danger? The person earning 10,000 per year or the person earning 100,000 per year? And that is what we are talking about today. The size of the economy has doubled in many folds. However, in layman terms, we choose to look at it from a nominal figure perspective instead of looking at the ratio perspective. And I think that is quite misleading. And I have to say this, of course, election is just around the corner. I think the opposition is conveniently misleading the people by telling the people that 1 trillion is a lot of money. Yes, 1 trillion is a lot of money. But if we compare this with the size of the economy,
with the GDP itself,
then I think it is manageable.
All right, at 50.9%, Desmond, what do you think of the fact that we have data that shows that Malaysia is actually in better position compared to some 90-odd countries around the world?
Right.
What's your take on that one?
See, we are now actually trying to benchmark ourselves to those countries, right? And which countries are we benchmarking upon, right? Are we looking at Vietnam, which is a very new market? Our market over down here is very much a mature market. Are we looking at Germany and US and UK here? Because as far as we are concerned, probably that calculation of GDP is way much different than whatever we are factoring over down here.
Well, it's true. Different countries would have different ways of actually calculating their GDPs.
Those,
But they generally would follow the same stream of calculation as a whole, which would reflect on the economy. That's a very interesting thought. We've got so much more to talk about. We'll touch a little bit about taxes and FDIs, foreign direct investments. Stay with us. When we come back, that's what we're going to talk about. This is Viewpoint.
Beijing. Where is the loss of sovereignty?
There is no way for Chinese to conquer us, Malaysia. They would like to assist us. They would like to help us. We must work together with them.
Welcome back to Viewpoint. Ian Sin of Create and Desmond of Hernan Crest with us to share their thoughts and insights into some of the topics that we're talking about, particularly the state of the economy in our country. Now, we're going to talk about China's investment in this country. As you've seen in that visual just now, there have been accusations of the government selling off the sovereignty of the nation. However, FDIs have always been a strong indicator of confidence by other nations around the world who deal in trade, and it actually helps spur economic growth and creates jobs. Why is it that China's investment is viewed by certain quarters differently from how economists perhaps would see it?
Well, if you really look at what China has brought into the country and all, it spurs development in the country. Now, well, look at the past. Let's look at it the past, right? There was a wave of U.S. investments. A lot of companies from the U.S. was putting money into the country over here. Then after a while,
with all the MNCs being set up here, and
exactly,
all that,
exactly, and the shared service centers and all of those putting up here, and then eventually you got the service sector and also the manufacturing technology know-how from the Japanese. So the Japanese wave came in. You know, now let's just call it a Chinese wave then. Yeah, because as far as Malaysia is concerned, right, in saying we invite FDIs, we invite them over down here as long they fulfill the conditions and invest in the subsectors of MIDA that's been promoting all of this, trade, you know, as long that's happening, why can't we actually invite them to come? And further to that, they are not actually holding back on anything. They are creating jobs for us. Yeah, and further to that, look at the aspect of technology, the DFTZ, for example. You know, Jack Ma just came over down here and then decided to put it all over down here, and it's happened. So I don't see the need for a big hoo-ha on this area, because as long as the Chinese is within the subsector of what Malaysia has opened its boundaries on, I think the GDP growth will go up. Whatever the economists will say, it will just help the country.
One would actually think that this is actually a positive wave of Chinese investment into Malaysia. We're talking about some 63 billion so far that has come in from China and Hong Kong. And correct me if I'm wrong, certain fund managers and investors, they tend to have a herd mentality. I mean, we're not talking about Warren Buffett, of course, but there would be investors who have a herd mentality. They would go for selected nations to invest, right? And perhaps 63 billion is not really a big sum after all.
Well, I would like to take a geopolitical and political economy stance to answer this, because some people are saying that there may be hidden agenda regarding China's high investment in Malaysia. But from my perspective, I feel that there isn't any, and there need not be any hidden agenda, because I feel that China simply sees Malaysia as an important part of One Belt, One Road initiative. Hence, they invest heavily here to help us realize our economic potential. The amount of infrastructure development that Malaysia is going to benefit from this Chinese investment is tremendous. Just look at ECRL. It will cover 4 states. I come from Kelantan. In the near future, if we board the train from Kota Baru or Tumpat, it will only take us a mere 4 to 5 hours train for us to reach Kuala Lumpur. And I think that is a breakthrough, not only in infrastructure development-wise, but it also opened up economic opportunities to people along the four states where the rail tracks will pass by. So that's one. Number 2, I feel that China also realized that they cannot prosper alone. China is a big country, and as China becomes the largest economic powerhouse in the world, China also understands that they need to make their neighbors prosper together. What would happen if China, as the biggest and largest economic powerhouse, but having very poor neighboring countries? China is not so silly to not also allow neighbors and friends to prosper together, because China knows that when Malaysia prosper, it would mean that ASEAN will prosper. And when Malaysia and ASEAN prosper, it would mean that we create a market to purchase Chinese goods and Chinese products in the near future. To me, it is just economics. It is really not about Chinese companies or Chinese government coming to Malaysia and take our land. Whatever you want to say about investment in infrastructure or land investment, nobody can cut away our land and take home. The land remains on Malaysian
and to be
land.
honest with you, Raymond, let's look at it, all right?
Yes,
Can
that's
we just skew China and say that, okay, Malaysia is the only country that's going to be taken over, for example, by the Chinese coming here?
Well, we do know that they're actively seeking investments abroad along the ASEAN belt as well.
Yeah.
Of course, yes.
And if you look at China, is all over. It's not only here. Look at that. Look at the Volvo now. Who's owning Volvo?
Yeah,
Chinese company.
Chinese company.
Yeah, but I think in addition to that, I think it's also because of the very strategically location, the strategic location where Malaysia is situated at. And therefore, if you look at the world map, Malaysia is actually right smack in the middle of the trade route between the east and the west. And we all know that Straits of Malacca remain one of the busiest shipping lane or shipping line in this region. And that's why we are so important. If you remember, Obama, when he was the US president, he was lobbying so heavily for Malaysia to be part of the TPPA. Chinese government also wanted Malaysia to be part of RCEP and now OBOR. And I feel that if the US, the used to be largest world economic powerhouse in the world, and now China, both sees Malaysia as a very strategic country to develop together, do you think the two big countries will be so wrong in seeing Malaysia in such a
And I have to agree with
role?
Dinting over down here, because look at our policies over down here. Chinese, they are very fast. They want to really build fast, or they want to actually input the knowledge very fast. That's why Jack Ma put a deadline, right, for the DFTZ.
And that's why DFTZ is here.
Yeah, and look at our policies over down here. It is the land for doing business, Malaysia, because policies are there, they are flexible in it. People come, they can actually start doing business robust and very fast. Setting up a company or even having a JV, people are pretty much waiting for something like that. And the government is helping out via MIDA and also all their incentives. Pretty much we are the incentive hub in the world now.
And one thing that I would like to add on is that...
Well, you have to hold that thought for a while.
Okay.
We'll come back and let you finish that one. We've got a couple more areas that we'd like to touch on, perhaps taxes and cost of living. All right, stay with us on Viewpoint with both our eminent guests. Right, thank you so much for staying with us right here on Viewpoint. We have several areas that we have left to cover, and these include, of course, cost of living and perhaps GST. Yi Sin and Desmond with us. Let's talk a little bit about the cost of living. It's been a major concern for Malaysians on a whole. In fact, one of the major thrusts of the BN's manifesto, as well as some of the opposition coalition's manifesto, is actually to address this. And this will be a topic which is rather hot for discussion during the campaign period. Now, the government has actually taken various initiatives to address this, and are we on a very positive track? Because sometimes people look at some of these policies and initiatives as it may take a little longer to really be able to show some results. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, number one, the high cost of living is a structural issue that comes in tandem with urbanization. That's underlying theory that all of us must recognize that. And it is certainly not caused by policies or just the GST, and definitely not because of any mismanagement of the economy. I think we have to really get that right, because of course, now that election is around the corner, GST seems to be one of the favorite line of all politicians from both sides of the divide. Yes, we blame the government most of the time when we see price hike in the teh tarik, perhaps from 2 ringgit to 2.50, and then we blame our government when everything have a price hike of more than 6%. But many times we have to understand that inflation happen sometimes because of the doing of the coffee shop or the small traders, and not all the blame should go to the government. But
so what you're saying is, it's not just GST per se that's affecting the cost of living to go up. It's so many other factors.
There's so many other factors. Of course, there will also be traders who take a free ride on this. And everybody claimed that with GST, withdrawal of subsidy or rationalization of subsidy of sugar, petrol, everything goes up. But when petrol price gone up and the prices come down or whatever, we never see an adjustment in selling price.
Which is something I cannot understand. When oil prices are high, everything goes up. When oil prices are down, everything still stays up.
Yes.
So if you really look at it, everyone is having their teh tarik anyway, right? Today we talk about rising cost of living and all of those aspects. But let's just go back to who we are actually, you know. We are a multicultural nation. Yeah, we are pretty much Indian, Chinese, and also Malay. And look at our culture, our working culture, for example. Maybe rising cost of living, it talks about minimum wage and all that, but we all know about all this minimum wage and all that, isn't it? But look at the culture itself. The Chinese, most of the time, they are actually working and they eat outside, right? We Indians, we actually pretty much sit at home and we cook ourselves. Yeah, and Malay, we are more family orientated. So the majority of the Malays these days are actually moving and becoming more entrepreneurial and all that. And the government is initiating on all of this. And you will notice in majority in the urban area than the rural, the cost of living is slightly higher. But rural area, most of them are actually pretty much, you know, they have their own chicken which they rear, you know, they have their own paddy fields, you know, and they are living a slower life. But in general, right, I think it's more of a cultural issue here. So
versus a money management issue.
Exactly, and the economy itself. Can you just blame the economy just because you know, you yourself can't manage your household? That's one area.
Right.
Can I very quickly provide an example? 5 lines.
We're running short of time.
A real scenario on the ground.
And I still have one question to ask you on GST.
Assuming that a family combined income, a couple takes home 10,000 ringgit a month. You pay 2,000, so 10,000, 2,000 for rent or housing loan, you save 2,000. You have 6,000 disposable income. With the hundreds, more than 100 over items, zero-rated items under the GST bill, let's say you spend 1,000 on zero-rated goods.
Okay.
So therefore, you've got 5,000 ringgit to spend. Assuming that this 5,000 ringgit will be impacted by 6% of GST, 5,000 times 6% is 300 ringgit. What is the overall percentage of this 300 ringgit out of your 10,000 salary per month, your take-home salary per month?
That's an excellent point.
It is a mere 3%. But most of the time, we only remember we pay GST on everything.
That's a precise,
because
very precise illustration.
Yeah, because every day when we pay for something, we see the word GST there, and therefore it hits us every day.
Okay, quick question on GST. We've collected, the government has collected 45 billion ringgit, all right? Is that a fair reflection of the fact that the state of economy is healthy and thriving?
I think
considering
so.
that people are spending.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you won't collect that kind of money.
Well, we all go to the shopping malls every day. We are still spending. Look at our travels. Well, Malaysians are traveling all over the world.
I think not only that, I think GST is a very fair and broad-based tax, because before the GST days, when we were talking about SST during Tun Mahathir's time, many businesses evade taxes, especially those in the gaming industry, illegal the not so nice businesses. There are always ways for them to evade taxes, and income taxes are always being paid by wage earners, because wage earners can't run away from anything. However, with GST, when everybody needs to declare and claim back their GST, it is very hard for businesses to actually evade taxes, and therefore it is fair. When you consume more, you pay more.
Since you mentioned that, I remember many economists have mentioned that GST for many nations is actually the answer to a fairer tax system. Are you in agreement with that?
Yes, I'm very much in agreement to that. You must understand what GST is all about and what kind of tax is this thing, this particular element, yeah? The tax itself is a transactional based tax. If you buy something, there is a GST, yeah? So when businesses, when they actually charge GST to someone, maybe business to business, they charge GST to the next business, right? So, end of the day, one is charging, the other one is actually claiming back. So, if you are wanting to actually look at the GST itself, you've got to record all of this down, because this GST is not yours to claim for, you know. So many of the businesses these days don't understand. They just view GST, oh, there's a tax over down there. Let's just say, okay, GST is bad and, you know, it's actually consuming our spending and all that. But at the end of the day, okay, look, it's a transactional-based tax. So if it's a transactional-based tax, businesses need to start recording their transactions now. And that is why GST itself, it's a police within transactions.
And it's also a revenue for the government in order to implement subsidies, incentives,
Exactly.
and BRIM, the ever popular BRIM, especially for the B40. And wouldn't you say that this helps targeting the right population to assist in terms of financial assistance?
Well, looking at what the World Bank has mentioned so far, our poverty rate now has been reduced by the leadership of our Prime Minister Najib. It has gone down to probably 1%. Yeah, and the B40 over down there is just looking at that area, and they have actually supplemented this. Now, the collection of GST itself, it has been dispersed to many subsectors. Obviously, if you're looking at
more effective targeting at that.
Obviously,
as well.
because when you have such a GST amount,
Right.
obviously you look into the deficit of the country, you look into B40s and all the aspects. Now, when you look at BRIM and all that's been put, obviously there's an allocation for that using the GST itself for it. So I have to be in agreement with all of this because it's 45 billion. Well done. Okay, we collected well. Yeah.
Well, Desmond, thank you so much. Yisin, thank you so much as well. Both of you have been wonderful guests this evening. Thank you so much for your insight. I'm afraid we ran out of time. And with that, this actually wraps up Viewpoint this time around. But we'll be on same time tomorrow night. So make sure you stay tuned to NTV7 for more discussions as we run up to the 14th general election.